We look to hospitals as places of healing and safety, which is exactly why horror filmmakers love to turn them into clinical nightmares. The sterile, fluorescent-lit world of medical horror thrives on the absolute loss of personal control, transforming the very tools meant to save us into instruments of psychological and physical terror. It is a genre that strips away our comfort, forcing us into cold white corridors, ominous operating rooms, and industrial mazes where the people in authority are often far more dangerous than any supernatural monster. Tonight we're checking in to explore 10 terrifying titles from the world of hospital and medical horror. These are the films that tap directly into our deepest anxieties about bodily autonomy, experimental science, and the quiet paranoia hidden behind a doctor's mask. From the slow-burn psychological dread of telekinetic hospital patients to the visceral, over-the-top madness of rogue mad scientists, these stories turn the clinic into a slaughterhouse. Take a deep breath and prepare for your appointment as we examine 10 medical horror essentials.
Visiting Hours, 1982. After a televised debate where journalist Deborah Ballin takes a firm stand on women's rights, she attracts the attention of a violent stalker. Brutally attacked in her own home, she survives and is rushed to the hospital. But her nightmare is only beginning. The attacker isn't finished, and as Deborah struggles to recover, the hospital itself becomes the hunting ground for a relentless killer. Directed by Jean-Claude Lord, Visiting Hours is a Canadian slasher that leans into suspense and atmosphere as much as gore. Lee Grant stars as Deborah, bringing strength and vulnerability to a role that grounds the film in realism. Michael Ironside is chilling as the disturbed killer, delivering one of his most unsettling performances, while William Shatner appears in a smaller but memorable role as Deborah's network producer. The sterile hospital setting gives the film a unique edge. Bright hallways and bustling wards become spaces of dread once the killer begins stalking them. The tension builds not just through the attacks, but through the constant unease that nowhere feels safe. What makes Visiting Hours endure is its cast. Grant and Ironside's dynamic elevates the material, turning what could have been a standard stalk and slash into something far more intense. The cat-and-mouse pacing keeps the danger ever present, while the performances give it weight. While it didn't gain the mainstream recognition of other 1982 slashers, Visiting Hours thrived on cable and VHS, remembered for its strong leads and unnerving realism. It remains one of the decade's more distinctive thrillers, balancing exploitation with a surprising amount of gravitas. The Dentist, 1996. In the sun-soaked streets of Los Angeles, Dr. Alan Finestone is the picture of perfection. A respected dentist, a successful professional, and a man seemingly in control of every aspect of his life. But beneath the pristine office and polished demeanor lies a mind teetering on the edge. Obsessive, controlling, and meticulous to the point of obsession, Finestone's world is built on order. And he cannot tolerate betrayal or imperfection. That fragile balance shatters on his wedding anniversary when he discovers his wife, Brooke's infidelity. What begins as personal heartbreak quickly erupts into a dangerous, unhinged spiral. Consumed by rage, Finestone begins to see decay and corruption everywhere, and his patients' mouths become both symbols and instruments of his obsession. Armed with dental tools designed to heal, he turns them into instruments of terror, exacting retribution in a series of shocking and meticulously orchestrated attacks. Each act of violence is cold, precise, and terrifyingly intimate, reflecting a mind unraveling under pressure. The film delves deep into themes of control, obsession, and the fragility of the human psyche. As Finestone's descent accelerates, viewers are drawn into a claustrophobic world where perfection is deadly and paranoia reigns. The tension builds not just through the acts themselves, but through the psychological horror of witnessing a man lose all restraint, turning everyday objects into tools of fear. The Dentist blends visceral terror with psychological intensity, creating a story that is as unsettling as it is unforgettable. Watching Alan Finestone's unraveling is both horrifying and mesmerizing, a glimpse into the darkest corners of obsession and vengeance. For fans of the 90s thrillers that combine character-driven tension with shocking horror, this film is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are human, and that madness can hide behind the most perfect smiles. The Exorcist 3, 1990. The Exorcist 3 is one of the most surprising sequels in horror history, a film that ignores the excess of Exorcist 2 and instead returns to the psychological dread and theological weight of the original, but through an entirely new lens. Written and directed by William Peter Blatty, the author of The Exorcist, this entry trades spectacle for atmosphere, crafting a slow, unnerving descent into faith, doubt, and evil that feels more like a detective story than a possession film. The story follows Lieutenant Kinderman, reprised by George C. Scott, as he investigates a string of brutal murders linked to a killer long thought dead, and to events that should be impossible. As his search leads him back to a psychiatric ward, the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural begin to collapse, culminating in one of the most haunting third acts of the decade. Blatty builds his horror through dialogue, silence, and dread instead of cheap scares. The film's pacing is deliberate, almost meditative, allowing every unsettling moment to breathe. When it does strike, it hits hard, including one of the most famous jump scares in horror history, executed with masterful precision. The Exorcist 3 isn't just a course correction for the franchise, it's a rare example of a sequel that dares to be introspective. It explores guilt, redemption, and the quiet persistence of evil with a sense of intelligence and restraint that make it as haunting today as it was in 1990. Proof that horror can still unsettle the soul without ever raising its voice. X-Ray, 1982. When Susan Jeremy checks into a hospital for a routine medical exam, she ends up trapped in a sterile maze of madness. Somewhere in the building, a masked killer has switched her records and begins stalking her through endless white corridors, turning the entire hospital into a death trap of fluorescent lights and surgical steel. Also known as Hospital Massacre, this early 80s slasher takes one of the safest, most clinical environments imaginable and makes it feel deeply unsafe. Directed by Boaz Davidson and starring Barbi Benton, the film turns medical horror into something dreamlike and disorienting, more fever nightmare than reality. Every hallway looks the same, every face feels slightly off, and the sense of paranoia builds with every scene. What's fascinating about X-Ray is how it merges the early slasher formula with psychological unease. It's bloody and exploitative, sure, but it's also strangely hypnotic, lingering on details that make you feel trapped right alongside the victim. The lighting, the sound, even the hospital machinery itself starts to feel alive. It's not one of the most famous slashers of its era, but it's one of the most memorable in texture. A gleaming antiseptic nightmare that makes you look twice the next time you see an empty hospital hallway at night. Patrick, 1978. For 3 years, Patrick has lain motionless in a hospital bed. Eyes open, body unresponsive, seemingly locked away from the world. To most, he looks like a harmless coma patient. But in Richard Franklin's 1978 film, Patrick, that silence hides something terrifying. An active, calculating mind with psychokinetic powers. Assigned to his care is nurse Kathy Jacquard, played by Susan Penhaligon. At first, she treats Patrick as any other long-term patient. But strange events begin to ripple through the clinic. Equipment behaving oddly, people injured in bizarre accidents, and a creeping sense that Patrick is aware of everything around him. When he begins to communicate through a typewriter, it becomes clear he's not only conscious, but also obsessed, fixated on Kathy in ways that quickly turn dangerous. What sets the film apart is its restraint. Instead of leaning on gore or jump scares, Patrick builds its tension slowly through atmosphere and psychology. Every silence stretching a little too long, every glance from Patrick's wide, unblinking eyes carrying a threat. His powers make him terrifying, not because they're loud or flashy, but because they're invisible. Subtle intrusions into the lives of those around him. There's also an ethical edge to the story. How do you care for someone who can control you without moving a muscle? Where does compassion end and self-preservation begin? That blend of suspense, moral unease, and Hitchcock-inspired pacing is what's given Patrick its lasting cult reputation. By the end, it's not just a story about a man in a coma. It's a story about obsession, control, and the frightening possibility that even the most helpless figure might be the most dangerous one of all. Dead Ringers, 1988. With Dead Ringers, Cronenberg traded parasites and mutations for something far more intimate, psychological decay that feels just as invasive. Jeremy Irons delivers a career-defining dual performance as twin gynecologists Beverly and Elliot Mantle, brilliant doctors who share everything: their practice, their research, and even their lovers. When one of those relationships begins to divide them, the twins' perfect symmetry starts to crumble, and their obsession with control turns inward. Cronenberg treats their descent not as spectacle, but as tragedy. The surgical tools gleam like instruments of ritual, and the cold clinical setting feels detached from the real world, a sterile cathedral where flesh and identity lose meaning. The body horror here isn't about transformation, it's about dependency. Irons' dual performance is haunting, subtle, precise, and disturbingly believable. You forget you're watching one actor because he makes both brothers feel whole, yet fractured. Genevieve Bujold adds another layer of sadness as the actress who becomes both muse and mirror, the catalyst for their downfall. Released at the tail end of the 80s, Dead Ringers feels like the culmination of everything Cronenberg had been exploring for over a decade: identity, obsession, and the thin tissue separating mind from body. It's elegant, clinical, and devastating. By stripping away the overt horror, he revealed something far scarier: that self-destruction doesn't always come from mutation or infection. Sometimes it's born from the need to feel whole. Re-Animator, 1985. Stuart Gordon's Re-Animator is a wild fusion of splatter horror and pitch-black comedy, loosely adapted from H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West Re-Animator. It tells the story of Herbert West, a brilliant but unhinged medical student who develops a glowing green serum capable of bringing the dead back to life. What begins as scientific ambition quickly spirals into chaos, gore, and madness. Jeffrey Combs steals the film as West, playing him with manic intensity and deadpan arrogance. His obsession with conquering death turns him into both the film's hero and its villain, a man as dangerous as the creatures he creates. Bruce Abbott provides the straight man as Dan Kane, the fellow student reluctantly drawn into West's experiments, while Barbara Crampton adds both humanity and vulnerability as Dan's girlfriend, Megan. What makes Re-Animator unforgettable is its audacity. The film doesn't just push boundaries, it smashes through them with gallons of blood and outrageous set pieces. From severed heads with a mind of their own to morgue corpses exploding into grotesque violence, Gordon leans into practical effects that are both shocking and darkly hilarious. Composer Richard Band's tongue-in-cheek score, riffing on Bernard Herrmann's Psycho theme, sets the perfect tone for the madness. Beneath the over-the-top gore lies a clever streak of satire. Re-Animator pokes fun at the arrogance of science, the institutions that enable it, and the fragile line between genius and insanity. It's messy, outrageous, and utterly fearless, a midnight movie classic that embodies the wild, anything-goes energy of 1980s horror. Bad Dreams, 1988. In the late 1970s, a young woman named Cynthia narrowly survives the fiery destruction of a cult known as Unity Fields, led by the fire-obsessed Franklin Harris. Burned and traumatized, she spends the next 13 years in a coma, only to awaken in a psychiatric hospital where reality and nightmare blur. As Cynthia struggles to piece her life back together, members of her therapy group begin dying in violent, seemingly self-inflicted ways. And she swears she sees Harris, long dead, lurking in the shadows, urging her to join him. Bad Dreams is often called a cousin to a Nightmare on Elm Street, and the comparison makes sense. Surreal deaths, dreamlike visuals, and a villain who can reach across the boundary of life and death. But what sets it apart is its tone, grim, psychological, and steeped in the trauma of surviving a cult. Jennifer Rubin, fresh off Elm Street 3, gives Cynthia a haunted vulnerability that makes her struggle deeply human, even as the horror around her escalates. The imagery is powerful. Scorched figures rising from the flames, Harris appearing with a preacher's calm amid chaos, and sudden transitions from the safety of a hospital ward into fiery visions of destruction. Practical effects sell both the gore and the dreamscapes, with burns, blood, and fire creating a tactile atmosphere of dread. At its heart, Bad Dreams is about guilt and survival. Cynthia's fight isn't just against a cult leader's lingering spirit, it's against the weight of memory and the scars of abuse. The film uses horror to explore the difficulty of reclaiming life after tragedy, even as it delivers the shocks and bloodshed audiences crave. Though overshadowed in its time, Bad Dreams stands as a sharp, unsettling entry in late 80s horror. It's part supernatural slasher, part psychological thriller, and it lingers long after the final flames fade. Dr. Giggles, 1992. This slasher leans into medical-themed mayhem, with a killer who escaped an institution and returns home wearing his father's doctor coat. The backstory reveals a twisted family legacy. His father attempted unorthodox procedures to save his dying wife, and now the son continues the obsession with violent treatments delivered to anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path. Larry Drake's performance drives the film. He plays Dr. Rendell with theatrical flair, delivering sinister bedside humor and a chilling laugh that gives the movie its title. Every murder incorporates medical equipment or procedures, turning operating room tools into weapons. The effects team delivers practical gore that fits the stylized tone rather than pushing into mean-spirited extremes. Holly Marie Combs portrays a teenager dealing with her own health issues, making her a symbolic and literal target for Rendell's deranged mission. The cast of friends, family, and local officials fills classic slasher roles, but gains a unique twist from the medical context. Director Manny Cotto treats the material with just enough seriousness to make the stakes feel real while embracing dark humor. The hospital set climax features some of the film's best visual moments, with Rendell navigating corridors like a surgeon on a hunt. Released during a lull in slasher popularity, it didn't spark box office enthusiasm, but thrived in video stores thanks to Drake's memorable performance and the creative medical gimmickry. Today, it's fondly remembered as one of the more inventive oddities of early 90s horror. Flatliners, 1990. Directed by Joel Schumacher, this psychological sci-fi thriller steps away from traditional Gothic horror conventions to deliver a highly stylized visual examination of life after death. Released at the dawn of the 1990s, the film uses a neo-Gothic aesthetic that blends classical architecture with modern medical facilities. The cinematography by Jean de Bont relies heavily on high contrast, atmospheric lighting, washing entire scenes in deep neon blues, intense saturated reds, and autumnal ambers. The visual landscape is dominated by heavy shadow work and surreal, dreamlike montages that illustrate the characters' mental states during clinical death. The plot follows 5 ambitious medical students at an elite Chicago university who launch an illicit, clandestine scientific experiment. Driven by competitive academic hubris, they take turns intentionally stopping their own hearts and flatlining on an operating table for increasingly longer intervals to chart the biological topography of the afterlife before being resuscitated by their peers. The scientific thrill turns into a psychological nightmare when they realize that returning from the other side carries an unforeseen, terrifying price. As each student revives, they find themselves systematically stalked by visceral, physical manifestations of their past childhood sins, deep traumas, and moral failures, forcing them to confront their personal demons in the waking world. Kiefer Sutherland anchors the ensemble cast as the reckless visionary Nelson Wright, flanked by a lineup of young talent including Julia Roberts, Kevin Bacon, William Baldwin, and Oliver Platt. The production stands as an important stylistic touchstone of its era, utilizing a complex layered sound design and optical editing effects to depict the boundary between life and death. It functions as a distinct example of high-concept psychological cinema.
If you enjoyed this trip through the vaults, check out the links in the description for more ways to support the channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is somebody's favorite.